Welcome back to our afternoon session of the regular County Commissioners Board meeting. I'll call this meeting to order. We have two public hearings that are public works items that are 1:30 time certain. Today is October 14th, 2025, and I'm opening a public hearing on ordinance 25-05. Is there a request from any commissioner to read the ordinance in full? If not, I'll just read the title only. Thank you very much. Ordinance number 2505 in the matter of amending Lane County Code Chapter 9, Sections 9.005.005, 9.005.010, 9.010.005, 9.10.050, 9.015.005, 9.020.005, 9.020.010, 9.020.015, 9.020.020, 9.020.025, 9.020.030, 9.020.035, and finally, 9.020.040. Changes reflect minor grammatical errors, consistency of terms, with largest edits to sections 9.005.010 definitions and 9.015.005 urban growth area recycling regulations. These changes are necessary for Lane County to comply with Oregon Revised Statutes, ORS, and Oregon Administrative Rules, OAR, Chapter 340, which set forth new provisions related to the Recycling Modernization Act relating to recycling and solid waste management. The ordinance before us is a proposal to amend Lane County Code Chapter 9 that was initiated by Waste Management Division to comply with House Bill 582 and Oregon Revised Statute 459A. The order of the proceedings for this hearing will be first the report by staff, followed by public testimony, and then additional comments by staff. All commissioners are required to disclose any potential or actual conflicts of interest that they may have with the proposal before us. That means if a commissioner or one of their relatives could be financially impacted, positively or negatively, by the proposal, that should be disclosed for the record, followed by a statement that the commissioner can or cannot proceed. If there is an actual conflict, that must be disclosed on the record, and then the conflicted commissioner must recuse themselves and step out of the room until the public hearing has concluded. Now I'll ask each commissioner to disclose any conflicts. First, Vice Chair Senega. Commissioner Buck.
I'm going to, out of abundance of caution, just declare a potential conflict of interest due to my family's relation with St. Vincent de Paul, who diverts waste from a waste stream, and this has to do with recycling. I'm not clear that there's a direct conflict, but because I'm related to the executive director emeritus, who's still employed by St. Vincent de Paul in this waste stream business, I'm just going to declare it as a potential, but not an actual at this point.
Great, thank you very much. Commissioner Trieger.
None to declare.
And Commissioner Farr.
I have none, thank you.
And myself, I have none as well. Now I'll ask for any challenges to any commissioner's ability to participate in the public hearing. If anyone wishes to challenge a commissioner for a conflict of interest, the challenger should explain the basis for the challenges. The commissioner challenged will have an opportunity to respond and state whether they're able to proceed without an actual conflict of interest. Does any member of the public wish to challenge any commissioner's ability to participate in this public hearing? Is there any online, Jessica?
No, there are not.
Okay, great. Thank you. Seeing none, I'll hand the presentation over to the staff, and Angie Marzano, our Waste Reduction Program Manager, it's all yours.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, Commissioners, and the public. My name is Angie Marzano. I'm the Waste Reduction Program Supervisor. I'm joined this afternoon with Emily Barrio, County Counsel, who helped assist in many of the amendments I'm going to present today. So the role of the Waste Reduction Program at Lane County is to implement recycling, waste prevention, and reuse programs, and to ensure compliance with state laws required by the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. Today, we are here to bring forth amendments to Lane Code Chapter 9, which will adopt new provisions related to the Oregon Recycling Modernization Act. The amendments also reflect a conformance and alignment to Lane County legal standard and language. Most of the substantive changes before you today are in Section 9.015, Urban Growth Area Recycling Regulations. The chapter was added in 2018 for compliance, but hasn't seen any updates since. As you know, Lane County's regulatory authority lies in the areas within the urban growth boundary, but outside city limits. The primary purpose of being here today is to update you on the Recycling Modernization Act and why the amendments are necessary to comply with opportunity to recycle laws. So the Plastic Pollution and Recycling Modernization updates Oregon's outdated recycling system by building on local community programs and leveraging funding from producers of packaging to create a more resilient recycling system. The Oregon legislature passed the Recycling Modernization Act, SB 582, during the 2021 legislative session. The new law became effective in 2022, and we started seeing recycling program changes on July 1 of 2025 this year. The system-wide updates make recycling easier for the public to access and understand. It expands recycling collection and services. It upgrades facilities that collect and process recycling, and it creates environmental benefits while reducing social and environmental harms of plastic pollution. Producers and manufacturers of packaged products, namely paper and plastic food serviceware, will pay for many of the necessary upgrades and improvements to help ensure that Oregon's recycling system is successful. So as you all know, the county has a voluntary 63% recovery rate goal. That means that all of the materials that we take in at our 15 transfer sites, we aspire to recycle, compost, reuse 63% of that material. To date, our recovery rate is 49.7%, and it continues to go down while generation goes up. This is namely because of plastic products that are introduced to the market with no solution for consumers to recycle those products. This law is aimed at increasing recovery of paper, plastics, and metals, readily recyclable materials with domestic markets that can handle that material. So Oregon's base recycling law is the Opportunity to Recycle Act, Oregon Revised Statute 459A, which the Oregon legislature most recently amended in 2021. The Department of Environmental Quality elaborates through the Opportunity to Recycle laws, administrative rules. DEQ then regulates local governments' recycling, waste prevention, and reuse programs according to the 2050 Vision and Framework for Action. It's essentially the solid waste management plan for the entire state of Oregon. The 2050 Vision guides statewide policy for managing materials throughout their full life cycle, including recovery, reduction, and reuse and recycling. Lane County is the waste shed representative that works with cities across Lane County, population over 4,000, to achieve Opportunity to Recycle compliance. The most substantive changes in the document include amendments to the Urban Growth Area Recycling Regulations, specifically outlining program requirements for providing communities recycling, the materials required for commingle, curbside, and at depots, defining adequate space for multifamily units, and methods for measuring contamination. We also took the liberty to change terminology from hauler to service provider to better align with ORS 459A. This change is mostly the reason you see text changes in sections 9.020, 005, and beyond. We also used the Oxford comma to make the document more readable and conform with American English widely recommended for legal documents. We used and were consistent with our use of acronyms, excuse me. And then we tried to be consistent and use nouns instead of verbs when stating a sentence that was bulleted, better clarifying an action or an activity we wanted the entity to comply with. The only other thing that I would add is this was really meant to clarify Chapter 9 to make it more readable and reflective of the current solid waste system that we're operating in. Thank you for your time today, and I welcome public comment, feedback from the board, and approval of the ordinance.
Great, thank you very much, Ms. Marzano. Appreciate that very much. Is there any questions or clarifying questions from the commissioners before we move on to public testimony? Seeing none, let's invite public testimony on the proposed code amendments. We'll start with anyone signed up in Harris Hall to speak, and then join virtually. I'm seeing a head shake from the back. Nobody. Okay, anybody online? Jessica?
No one is joining us virtually.
Okay. Then we will move down. We'll conclude the public testimony, and now I'll go back to staff for any additional comments.
None at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. Onward and skyward. All right, we're down to the closing portions of this hearing, and we are looking for, do we have any commissioners? Okay, so do we have any commissioners that have questions for staff or need additional information before we close the public hearing and move on to deliberations? Yes, Commissioner Farr, please.
Could I have a better definition of the Oxford comma, please?
I Googled that while you were talking, by the way.
The correct comma.
Oh, boy. That's all I have, Chair. Thank you.
All right, before we deliberate too much on the Oxford comma, is there a motion to close the public hearing?
Chair, I move to close the public hearing.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved by Vice Chair to close the public hearing and seconded by Commissioner Buck. All those in favor signify with an aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion is passed. The public hearing is now closed. If now the public hearing is now closed on hearing 2505, we can move on to the appropriate options and the time for the board to deliberate and take action. The staff is presented with two options. We can either move to approve the second reading and adopt the ordinance as presented, or we can move to approve the second reading and set a third reading for October 21st. I'm looking for a motion.
Chair, I move to approve the second reading and adopt ordinance number 2505 as presented.
Awesome. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you for my motion team. We have a motion by Vice Chair and a second by Commissioner Buck to move approval of the second reading and adopt ordinance 2505 as presented. Is there any discussion to the motion? Yes, Commissioner Farr.
Just a question, and you probably can't answer this at this moment in time, but I'm looking at the bullet points, and it says producers and manufacturers will pay for system expansions and investments. Of course, we all know that the end user pays, and the producers and manufacturers pass along that. But my question there is there any estimate on what the costs are going to be? You don't need to answer that right now, but maybe at some point, if there has been some discussion, some study of what the ultimate cost is going to be of the expansion of depot recycling services, upgrade facilities, et cetera.
So your question is specific to how much the differential will be with products? Like what producers will pass on to products?
No, that's more esoteric, isn't it? No. Regarding the expansion of access to curbside and depot recycling services, facilities expansion that we anticipate due to the passing of the ordinance and the Modernization Act.
So all local governments in Lane County, they filled out a needs assessment. This was right when the law was passed. And it basically asked local communities to report to DEQ on what their sort of system expansion needs would look like. Mm-hmm. So I'll give you a perfect example. In the Cottage Grove area, they are serviced by one franchise hauler, Cottage Grove Garbage Disposal. He indicated that he would need an automated truck to allow for and provide the opportunity for residents in Cottage Grove to have automated curbside recycling commingle with carts. So he has already seen those investments come into the city of Cottage Grove, valued at around $600,000 for the purchase of a truck and containers. So starting in 2026, that community that did not have the opportunity or availability to commingle curbside is now going to start that service first of the year.
That is in fact a perfect example, thank you. And the infrastructure that's being paid for and equipment that's being paid for will last a long time, needless to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, right on, thank you.
Any further discussion to the motion? All right, seeing none, we need to have a roll call vote on this motion. Mr. McCrasky, would you do the honors, please?
I will. Commissioner Suniga,
Yes.
Commissioner Trieger,
Aye.
Commissioner Buck,
Aye.
Commissioner Farr,
Aye.
and Commissioner Lovall.
Aye. Motion passes 5-0. Thank you very much. Ms.
Thank
Marzano,
you
have a
all.
wonderful day. Great presentation. Thank you again.
Thanks.
We'll move on to our item B, our second public hearing for the day. Today is still October 14th, 2025, and I'm opening a public hearing on ordinance 2507. Is there a request from any commissioner to read the ordinance in full? If not, I will read the full title. Ordinance number 25-07 in the matter of amending Lane Code Chapter 16 to adopt clear and objective standards for housing in residential areas in sections 16.090 definitions, 16.237 significant natural shorelands combining zone, SNRCP, 16.238 prime wildlife shorelands combining zone, PWRCP, and 16.239 Natural Reserve Conservation Combining Zones, NRC-RCP, 16.240 Residential Development Shorelands Combining Zone, RD-RCP, 16.241 Shorelands Mixed Development Combining Code, MD-RCP, 16.242 Dredge Material Mitigation Site Combining Zone, DMS-RCP, 16.243 Beaches and Dunes Combining Zone, BD-RCP, 16.253 Stream Riparian Regulations Rural Comprehensive Metro Plan, and 16.254 Greenway Development Permit Rural Comprehensive Plan as required by Oregon Revised Statute 197A.400, updating preferences in other sections of Lane Code, and adopting a savings and severability clause and declaring an emergency. File number 509-PA25-05301. The ordinance before us is a proposal to amend Lane Code Chapter 16 that was initiated by the Land Management Division to comply with House Bill 3197 and Oregon Revised Statute 197A.400. The order of proceedings for this hearing will be first the report by staff, followed by public testimony, and then additional comments by staff. All commissioners are required to disclose any potential or actual conflicts of interest that they have with the proposal before us. That means if a commissioner or one of their relatives could be financially impacted, positively or negatively, by the proposal, that should be disclosed for the record, followed by a statement that the commissioner can or cannot proceed. If there is an actual conflict, that must be disclosed on record, and then the conflicted commissioner must recuse themselves and step out of the room until the public hearing has concluded. Now I'll ask for each commissioner to disclose any conflicts. Vice Chair Seniga.
None.
Commissioner Buck.
None.
Commissioner Trieger.
None.
Commissioner Farr.
I have none, thank you.
And Commissioner Lovell, myself, I have none either. Now I'll ask for challenges to any commissioner's ability to participate in the public hearing. If anyone wishes to challenge a commissioner for a conflict of interest, the challenger should explain the basis for the challenges. The commissioner challenged will have an opportunity to respond and state whether they're able to proceed without an actual conflict of interest. Does any member of the public wish to challenge any commissioner's ability to participate in this public hearing? Pretty quiet. Seeing none, I'll hand the presentation over to staff. With this is Rachel Surslev and Kevin Gilbride. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Lovell, and good afternoon, Commissioners. For the record, I am Rachel Surslev, Senior Planner, and I have with me Kevin Gilbride, also a Senior Planner, and we are here to present on the Lane Code amendments for the Clear Standards for Housing in Residential Areas project. And I'm going to give a project overview. The Oregon governor signed House Bill 3197 in 2023, which amended ORS 197A.400 to clarify that local governments may adopt and apply only clear and objective standards for the approval of housing in rural areas. The areas of Lane County that House Bill 3197 applies to are rural residentially zoned lands such as rural non-resource and rural residential lands. The zoning regulations for those lands live at Lane Code Chapter 16.290 and 16.231. And you'll notice that we're not proposing amendments to those sections specifically because housing is already permitted outright in those sections. And we've determined that any conditions that apply to housing in those sections is already clear and objective. Therefore, the focus of this project is on overlay zones that may apply to housing in rural residential areas. Generally, we are proposing to amend the coastal shorelands overlays, the Greenway Code, and the stream riparian regulations. One of the focuses when making these amendments was not to change policy relating to the implementation of the overlay zones. Staff aimed to make clear and objective standards commensurate to the existing discretionary standards so that no policy decisions were being made regarding implementation of the overlay zones. Also, another significant point of clarification is that this project is not removing any options for establishing dwellings or for making the process more restrictive. We are only adding an option for permitting housing where it's already permitted and making it so that the regulations are clear and objective. So a little bit of project history. We've been working on this for quite some time. We started back in the summer of 2024 on these amendments. Staff did some public outreach where we engaged with stakeholders through the beginning stages of the project. We had meetings with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife regarding habitat and wildlife protections, as well as meetings with other counties who are also working to implement this bill. Also early on, we contracted with the Lane Council of Governments, who helped us with project scoping and with drafting amendments. In March, you might remember that staff was before you holding a work session with the board, providing information on the purpose and the scope of this project. Additional outreach was that staff held one-on-one interviews with interested parties such as local land use attorneys and special interest groups and state agencies. This project was also adequately noticed with a Department of Land Conservation and Development notice and through a ballot measure 56 notice, published notice, and we also emailed the notice to identified interested parties. Most recently, a public hearing with the Lane County Planning Commission was held on July 29th, 2025, and also a continued hearing with the Planning Commission on August 5th, 2025. And the Planning Commission heard public testimony, deliberated, and forwarded a recommendation of approval of the ordinance as written to the board. So now I'm going to move into the specific code amendments that we made. As mentioned earlier, we're making amendments to the riparian regulations, the coastal shorelands overlays, the beaches and dunes coastal overlay, the Greenway Code, and the definition sections. We also had to make some reference updates related to the reorganization of the riparian code. Staff audited all of Lane Code sections applicable to the development of housing for discretionary standards and criteria that might affect housing. The sections that we're amending with this project were identified as the highest priority to amend, though we anticipate that scoping other chapters for Lane Code amendments in the future will need to happen. Before we get into specific amendments, I want to discuss generally we tried to enhance readability and understandability to increase accessibility of the code for the public. However, we did not do a full reformat of the code, such as what would be done with the code modernization project, just given the time constraints of this project. We also updated internal citations by removing directional words, and we replaced the shalls existing in the code based on County Council's guidance. And we did all of these things consistently through the sections that we amended. So I'm going to dive into the riparian regulations first and also cover the coastal overlays, and then I'll hand it over to Kevin, who will discuss beaches and dunes and the greenway overlay and the definition section. So the stream riparian regulations originate from compliance with Oregon statewide planning goal 5 for natural resources, scenic and historic areas, and open spaces. This goal focuses on inventorying and protecting natural resources, such as riparian areas. Lane Code 16253 is the implementing lane code section that provides these protections. And in this section, we did a lot of reorganization and clarification of the riparian code that was necessary before we could even start looking at the clear and objective standards. Among this work, we created a section that more directly defined the riparian setback areas. We provided more codified details on the riparian declaration process. We highlighted an independent section that clarified that development is prohibited from the riparian setback area without type 2 approval. And we defined vegetation removal and renamed and clarified the procedures for locating development within the riparian setback area. And all of these things were in order to make that section a little bit more understandable when going through it. So specifically, turning to the amendments that we made, currently the development is prohibited from the riparian setback area unless a type 2 discretionary approval for development is obtained. However, development proposals could involve a dwelling structurally outside of the riparian setback area, but development associated to the house could still have impacts on the vegetation within the riparian setback area, given that there's a certain amount of vegetation removal that's permitted outright. Staff reviewed the status quo vegetation removal standards, which allow for an area of vegetation removal based on the amount of stream frontage that a property has. However, the current code is silent on how vegetation removal is defined and how the area of vegetation removal should be calculated. For instance, the code is not clear on if allowed vegetation removal must be in one area or could be counted cumulatively throughout the setback area. So given this lack of clarity, we created a clear and objective pathway for vegetation removal as it relates specifically to housing. A dwelling utilizing this pathway must be located outside of the setback area, but is allowed to have vegetation removal associated with the dwelling that occurs within the setback area. To limit the amount of vegetation removal within the setback area in a clear and objective way, we propose a setback that's measured from the center of the dwelling where vegetation can be removed. This clarifies that vegetation removal as related to housing can only be removed in one discrete area of the setback instead of the current standards where it's unclear if vegetation can be removed from various areas of the setback. We also allowed vegetation removal to occur in other parts of the setback as it's needed to develop driveway access, but we propose to cap the total amount of vegetation removal at 25% of the setback area, and this is consistent with the cap that exists for the discretionary pathway as well. So the standards are consistent with each other, we believe. And to be clear, by providing this pathway for clear and objective vegetation removal standards, the process for obtaining approval to locate development within the riparian setback is not being removed or altered in any way. If these amendments are approved as written, property owners still have the existing discretionary path available to them. So now I'm going to move into coastal overlays, which is hopefully a little less complex. The coastal overlays are a result of Oregon statewide planning goal 17, coastal shorelands, and the purpose of this goal is for the protection and management of coastal shorelands areas to maintain water quality, fish, wildlife habitat, recreation, and water-dependent uses. Lane Code 16.237 through 16.242 are various coastal shoreland overlay zones that we are proposing amendments to in order to address the need for clear and objective standards for housing. Staff took generally the same approach for amendments to each section because all of the shoreland zones generally contain the same or similar standards. The primary amendments made to create clear and objective pathways were to create vegetation removal standards and minimum setbacks for development of housing from lakes, estuaries, and the ocean. In the Shorelands Code, staff maintains the existing discretionary path for applicants proposing development other than housing or housing that cannot meet the standards for the clear and objective pathway. There's no change proposed for the coastal shorelands overlay mapping, and no substantial change to existing standards. So that concludes my part for the riparian and the coastal overlays, and I'm going to hand it back to Kevin.
Thanks, Rachel. So for beaches and dunes, Oregon statewide planning goal 18 focuses on conserving and protecting Oregon's beach and dune resources by reducing hazards associated with those environments. Lane County addresses goal 18 in the Coastal Resource Management Plan, CRMP, and the Rural Comprehensive Plan, RCP, by inventorying the types and locations of dune landforms that exist in the coastal areas of the county and identifying uses that the landforms are capable of sustaining while minimizing threat to human life and property. The CRMP and RCP outline policies for how development should occur on the various dune forms, and the policies of the CRMP and RCP are implemented by Lane Code 16243. This project does not propose to change how the CRMP, the RCP, and Lane Code work together, and proposes no changes to the inventories and mapping of the beach and dune resources. The amendments proposed for this section provide a new set of approval criteria and standards for applicants proposing housing development within the beach and dune overlay area, and some clarification and housekeeping changes. These amendments are similar to those made in the coastal overlay zones, and were developed by reviewing the existing discretionary site development criteria, omitting criteria inapplicable to the development of housing, and creating corresponding standards that are clear and objective. The beaches and dunes section limits the development of housing to only stabilized dune formations. So the clear and objective criteria is mainly focused on maintaining the stability of the geologic formations. For example, the vegetation removal standards are stricter than the shoreline sections because they are in conjunction with limitations on topographical modification, which is now defined in Lane Code 16090 through this ordinance, and sand stabilization requirements. All of this is in an effort to provide a clear and objective path for housing development while maintaining the integrity of the geologic formations by limiting the impact of development on the anchoring root mat. Additionally, in an effort to limit discretionary interpretation of the existing beaches and dunes mapping, the new standards also include a minimum setback from the state-determined coastal vegetation line and a requirement for determination by an Oregon licensed engineer of the compressibility of soils in the development areas. The engineer's analysis is meant to definitively determine that the proposed housing is on a stabilized dune formation. The changes to this section preserve the Type 1 preliminary investigation application, the hazards checklist as the first step in the process when proposing development in the beaches and dunes combining zone, and also preserve the existing Type 2 discretionary process for those who choose it. You may remember from this morning that the Type 1 process is part of the application process because the mapping is difficult to determine whether or not properties are actually in stabilized dune formations. And the future of that, we'll see. So moving on to Greenway. Oregon statewide planning goal 15 requires cities and counties to review new development, changes in use, and intensifications of use that take place within the boundaries of the Willamette River Greenway to ensure that development within the boundary is designed to protect, conserve, enhance, and maintain the natural, scenic, historical, agricultural, economic, and recreational qualities of lands along the river. The county's adopted Greenway development permit regulations and approval criteria are under Lane Code 16254. And under the current code, Greenway development permits are always reviewed using a Type 2 special use permit application process, which requires discretionary review and balancing of 19 different individual criteria. The amendments proposed for this section provide a new set of approval criteria and standards for applicants proposing housing development and some clarification and housekeeping changes like the other sections. An applicant proposing to develop housing in the Greenway will now be able to choose to proceed through a Type 1 administrative application under the new clear and objective approval criteria located under Lane Code 16254 sub 4. And the new clear and objective standards include specific vegetation removal restrictions centered on the footprint of a proposed proposed housing, and a minimum 300-foot setback from the ordinary high water line of the Willamette River. The idea of the vegetation removal standard is to balance the requirements of House Bill 3197 and Rural Comprehensive Plan Goal 15, Policy 19, which states that the county shall require to the maximum feasible extent the protection of the vegetative fringe within the Greenway, and shall require the reestablishment of vegetative cover where it has been significantly removed during the land development process. The minimum setback is intended to protect, maintain, preserve, and enhance the natural scenic vegetative area immediately surrounding the river per Rural Comprehensive Plan Goal 15, Policy 11, and to keep the development away from the river, which is Policy 10. The amendments do not change the existing discretionary Type 2 process. There are no substantial changes to other existing standards, and no changes proposed to the county's adopted Willamette River Greenway boundary. We also changed or added a bunch of definitions to make the clear and objective standards implementable and understandable. Those are included, Lane Code Chapter 16, LC 16090 is where definitions are located in Chapter 16. And the newly defined terms in the section are area zoned for residential use, ground disturbance, housing, setback, which wasn't defined, topographic modification, vegetation removal, removal of vegetation, and the modified definitions are ordinary high water, which was changed to ordinary high water line, and ordinary low water, which was changed to ordinary low water line. These terms were added or modified to make the standards proposed in the other sections of this project clear and objective. In alignment with the other amendments, staff aimed to draft these definitions so that they align with current practice and do not constitute a change in policy. And if the commissioners wish, now or during comment or during questioning, I'm happy to recite or discuss any of the added or modified definitions. I realize now we should have had slides with the definitions on them, but if we wanted to discuss them, but we didn't. So I'll read them out loud if you want. I'm going to move on to a little more esoteric things. At the public hearing on July 29th, 8 members of the public expressed confusion about the purpose and effect of the amendments proposed by this project, and this is pretty normal for any code amendment process. It's hard to convey exactly what we're doing in easily understandable terms all the time. So in general, the participants raised concerns about the amendment's impact on their properties and the potential for increasing housing in their neighborhoods and their perceived changes to the riparian setback provisions. At the hearing, staff clarified that the project aims to establish a housing pathway under clear and objective standards that does not increase the density of housing. It merely provides an alternative path for development that would have already been allowed under the current code, albeit subject to clear and objective standards. Staff also clarified that the proposed changes do not alter the existing allowances for housing in any of the amended code sections. And staff made clear that for properties with existing housing development, nothing is changing. The meeting ended with the attended members of the public expressing gratitude to staff and the Planning Commission for clarifying the intent of the project. It was a great meeting. At the follow-up hearing on August 5th, staff addressed written testimony received from Mr. Aaron Noteboom, an agent of 2 limited liability corporations who had been noticed of the proposed amendments through the ballot measure 56 notice. Mr. Noteboom criticized the proposed riparian amendments considering that they violated statewide planning goal 5 as proposed, and that they are overly restrictive regarding vegetation removal. Staff responded to Mr. Noteboom's comments by clarifying that this project does not propose any amendments to the county's Goal 5 inventory of protected riparian areas. It merely amends the code and adds a clear and objective option for the development of housing, which is required by House Bill 3197. Regarding Mr. Noteboom's perceived perception of the stringent nature of the clear and objective standards, I'll reiterate today that we recognize that the new standards may be inaccessible to some landowners. However, the nature of clear and objective standards is that they tend to be more rigid and less flexible than discretionary standards. And that's been reiterated by Land Use Board of Appeals in Dreyer v. City of Eugene, which is summarized in the memo to the board that clear and objective standards must address the regulatory interests of the county in public health and safety in a one-size-fits-all way. That applies to many different properties, and each of which may have challenges to development under inflexible cookie-cutter standards, which makes it difficult to apply them to in a easy way to every single property when they're trying to balance protections for resources with the allowance for a dwelling. This case is particularly helpful, informative, because the overlay zones subject to this process are all implementing multiple sets of goals, policies, standards, and criteria to protect some kind of sensitive resource. In these protected areas, making clear and objective standards for development that are, like I said, easy to meet or super flexible is a near impossibility without completely giving up on the resource altogether and facing litigation or running afoul of the Department of Land Conservation and Development's regulations. Mr. Noteboom also argued that the county's ballot measure 56 notice was insufficient. This issue was also raised by several of the constituents at the July 29th, 2025 meeting, where participants were noting that their neighbors didn't receive notice, but they did. And staff, we verified that Mr. Noteboom's clients had been mailed notice. They owned multiple properties, some of which were rural residential and some of which were resource zones, so they got notice for the rural residential zones. And also clarified to the constituents that the ballot measure 56 notice was only mailed for properties within the affected overlays of this project that were also zoned for rural residential use. So one property owner may have rural residential land and their neighbor might have forest land or farmland, so their neighbor didn't get notice because they're not actually impacted by this ordinance. Further, I'll note that we've received additional written comments from the public regarding today's proceedings, and those comments have been forwarded to the board. Comments from Mr. Close and Mr. Reeder, and I believe we gave you copies of Landwatch Lane County's comments just before this meeting. We also just received an email from the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife in favor of our amendments, and we'll address that more in public comment after this. And one final section from me, changes to the code since the Planning Commission hearing. The Lane County Planning Commission did not recommend that staff modify the ordinance prior to the board public hearing process, and recommended that the board adopt the ordinance as written. However, we did make some minor changes to the ordinance prior to the board hearing for the purpose of compliance with the Rural Comprehensive Plan and to correct code references and to fix some grammar. Now,
The Oxford comma again.
now I'll hand the reins back to Rachel to
Thank you.
close it out.
Thanks, Kevin. Okay, so moving on to board action and options for today. So the board has a couple of options for taking action today. Firstly, the board must decide whether to close the hearing, close the public hearing, or keep it open and continue it to a time and date certain. If the board does close the hearing today, then they have enough information to make a decision on the ordinance. And if the board decides to continue the hearing, they may need more information to make a decision about the ordinance or want staff to make changes to the code. If the public hearing is continued, staff has identified November 4th as a continued hearing date. And if the board chooses to close the hearing, then the board can approve the ordinance as presented or move to set a third reading for continued deliberations on the ordinance. And staff has identified October 21st as a date for continued deliberations, so just next week. And staff is recommending that the board close the public hearing and adopt the ordinance as written today. So that concludes staff's presentation, and thank you for your time and your attention.
Good. Thank you both, Kevin and Rachel. Appreciate that very much. Is there any clarifying questions from commissioners for staff before moving to the public testimony period? Seeing none, we'll now invite public testimony on the proposed code amendments. We'll start with anyone signed up in Harris Hall to speak, and then anyone joining virtually. Thank you very much. We have one signed up to speak in Harris Hall. When it's your turn to speak, Mr. Mike Reeder, come to the podium as you normally do. State your name and your mailing address, and you'll have 5 minutes, sir.
Good afternoon, Chair, Commissioners. My name is Mike Reeder. I am at 375 West 4th Avenue, Suite 205 in Eugene. I represent Kathy Jones McCann, who is a resident and property owner here in Lane County with property along the McKenzie River. I've provided you with written comments, and I also want to do a Me Too to the letter from Mr. Noteboom and the letter from Mr. Close. I will begin my remarks with a preface to help you understand that clear and objective standards are an admirable goal. As land use attorneys, we love clear and objective standards for obvious reasons. It helps our client understand what can and cannot be done on the person's property. And we have a lot of experience, both Bill Close and myself, with clear and objective standards in urban growth boundaries, where clear and objective standards for housing has been required for some time. And there was a point in time in which clear and objective standards were required outside of urban growth boundaries for all housing. That interpretation had been reversed, and then there was legislation which this proposed code amendment is in response to. So in the cases where local governments have not adopted clear and objective standards for housing, when there's an application for housing that runs into non-clear and objective standards, the requirement is that the local government not apply that non-clear and objective standard. So it is good policy for a local government to adopt standards that are clear and objective so that you don't have to ignore your own code. So the goal of doing this is an admirable goal. The problem is there's some poison pills in this proposal that I want to bring your attention to right now. First of all, I'd like to clarify something that Mr. Gilbride said regarding Mr. Noteboom's letter to the Planning Commission. And in his testimony, he seemed to suggest that the concern from Mr. Noteboom regarding Measure 56 notice was perhaps certain property owners that should have received notice didn't receive notice. That's not what his letter says. The concern that was raised, the objection about the Measure 56 notice, was that it was misleading, that the substance of the Measure 56 notice didn't address the substance of the proposed changes. So, for example, it says, the Measure 56 notice says, what is changing? This project is predominantly a technical project that is not intended to change current county land use policy. And for much of the proposed amendment, the ordinance that you're being asked to adopt, that is true. There really isn't a lot of substantive change to much of what is being proposed. But when there is a substantive change proposed, it is imperative that you go through the correct process, and this is not that correct process. So, for example, if you turn, and I don't know if you have this handy in front of you, but I will reference the legislative format of what you are being asked to adopt. And in that legislative format for the stream riparian regulations rural comprehensive metro plan, that's the code section is 16253. And if you look at the legislative format change, you see the addition of sub 2. And so I don't see page numbers here. I just see the legislative format, so it's 16253 sub 2. And it says riparian setback area. And this is the issue that concerns my client, which is actually going to come before you as part of a review of the hearings official's decision. This is what is being proposed. The riparian setback area is defined as the area within 100 feet of the ordinary high water line of a Class 1 stream in resource zones. What is removed, which is in the current code, is, and you can see that under the sub 2 that's stricken out, it says what is removed is Class 2 streams designated for riparian vegetation protection by the Rural Comprehensive Plan. This is a big deal. Staff is proposing to erase a Goal 5 program that was adopted by the board in the 1980s that has been relied upon by Lane County property owners for decades, including my client. So, back in the 1980s, Lane County was required to go through a Goal 5 process where they were to identify, inventory, and decide which riparian areas the Rural Comprehensive Plan and the code would protect. And what the county decided to do was to protect certain portions of certain Class 1 streams. And they did that. I see that I'm over time. I'm almost done. They did that by adopting a map that Mr. Noteboom provided to the Planning Commission, wherein there are certain Class 1 streams that are protected for riparian setbacks. That is a Goal 5 process. Staff is attempting to skirt the Goal 5 process of adopting a new Goal 5 program for riparian areas and stuff it in this legislative cleanup for, again, the admirable goal of having clear and objective standards. That is one example of a substantive policy change that needs to be addressed by the board in the appropriate context, not in a code cleanup context, but in the interpretation of the code, which will come before you under Jones-McCann, or going through a Goal 5 process that requires you to go through the state's Goal 5 regulations. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Reeder.
Thank you.
That concludes our public testimony portion. I'll go back to staff for any additional comments. And I'll give you a second to deliberate amongst yourselves for a second.
Sorry about
No, you go ahead.
I
We're
believe
doing it live here.
Kevin is gonna
Yeah,
do some response first.
I'll,
Thank you.
I'll go first because I have response to both Mr. Reeder and Mr. Close's submittals because we sent you written response regarding Mr. Close's submittal last night, and you may or may not have had time to read it and digest it, so I'll summarize. But they have similar substances. I'll start from the beginning. The first issue with Mr. Close's, that Mr. Close raised was the ordinance's massive length compared to its very narrow issue. However, the apparent volume of the ordinance is not due to the complexity of the underlying standards. It is due to the necessity of including every page of numerous sections of code, even if there was only a single reference change for updated riparian regulations. Mr. Close also requested or considered it necessary for staff to perform a full analysis of the land affected by this ordinance and their acreages. Staff considers this request irrelevant to the ordinance's substance, which provides a clear and objective permitting pathway for the development of housing without changes to the number of potentially developable properties. However, for the board's benefit, which we summarized in the memo as well, we mailed the Measure 59 notice to approximately 7,500 properties, totaling 31,806 acres. It's not clear at this time what the actual potential affected acreage is, and staff does not agree that this is a worthwhile exercise because the acreage affected by the amendments has no bearing on the substance of it. The second issue Mr. Close raised, that was also raised by Mr. Reeder in his written submittal, is a suggestion that the board could afford to take a more deliberate pace for considering the changes because there is no outside entity compelling the county to take action on House Bill 3197. Staff advise against the delay proposed by Mr. Close and Mr. Reeder, and note that the county has already passed the July 1st, 2025 deadline imposed by House Bill 3197 for adopting these clear and objective standards. A failure to adopt the ordinance immediately exposes the county to a higher risk for litigation and potential attorney fees if existing provisions are challenged and subsequently determined by LUBA or a higher court to not be clear and objective. Staff also refute the implication that this process has been rushed. This project has been underway for nearly 2 years. And in July and August of this year, we performed a two-part public hearing with the Planning Commission to which interested parties, including Mr. Close and Mr. Reeder, were notified. And further, prior to the Planning Commission, we held key stakeholder interviews, including an interview with Mr. Close and Mr. Reeder directly on April 3rd, 2025. The sixth issue, I'm skipping ahead because Rachel's going to talk about some of the other issues covered by Mr. Close, that Mr. Close raises, which is also raised by Mr. Reeder in the comments received by the board yesterday evening, is an assertion that adopting the current ordinance would preempt future policy issues related to the implementation of Lane Code 16253. Both Mr. Close and Mr. Reeder specifically cite to an upcoming board item to review the hearings official's decision on Jones-McCann, which is Planning Action PA 509-PA 24-05360. Mr. Close and Mr. Reeder's assertions are incorrect. The issues in the Jones-McCann case are separate and unrelated to this ordinance and do not warrant delaying action on the proposed ordinance. For context, Jones-McCann is an application that hopes to rectify a compliance case where a property owner constructed a dwelling without permits in the exclusive farm use zone, where state law requires a special use permit to establish a primary dwelling, within the riparian setback area, where development is restricted without a special use permit, and within the floodway, where development is forbidden by code. First, I'll note that the approval criteria applicable in the Jones-McCann case are governed by the goalpost rule. That means that even if we change the code now, that will not affect the criteria that applies to the Jones-McCann application. The new criteria will have no effect on that application. And as we've stated throughout this presentation, this ordinance is about how the riparian code applies to the development of housing in rural residential zones. The amendments do not apply to the exclusive farm use zone. As such, delaying adoption solely for the purpose of rectifying an unrelated compliance case in the exclusive farm use zone would be completely unnecessary. Additionally, staff note that Mr. Close and Mr. Reeder suggest that the board should push this process out to an additional hearing with an extended open record period. This appears to be in relation to the Jones-McCann issue, and staff does not consider an additional open record necessary for this matter. And then finally for me, in his seventh point, Mr. Close expressed concern that the new clear and objective standards might be more restrictive than the existing discretionary standards, and he questions if this aligns with the board's policy. Staff concedes that some of the clear and objective standards may be more onerous in certain circumstances, which is an inevitable outcome when converting already restrictive regulations. This concept is outlined in detail in the Dreyer v. Eugene case, which I discussed earlier in response to Mr. Noteboom's comments at the Planning Commission. However, staff emphasizes that this proposed ordinance does not make housing development more difficult overall because the current discretionary standards are maintained. They're not modified. The amendments simply provide property owners with an alternative policy or with an alternative pathway to streamlined permitting and giving property owners more choice in how to proceed with development while still protecting natural resources. Finally, I'll note that Mr. Reeder asserts that the proposed code amendments contain provisions that take away property rights. That is incorrect. The current code provisions remain after the amendments. Nothing is changing about the existing allowances of the code. So it's unclear and how the amended code results in the loss of existing property rights. That's all I've got for now.
Thanks, Kevin. I'm going to touch on a few more issues that Mr. Close raised in his letter to you all and that we responded to in our supplemental memo, but you may not have time to read that, so we're going to reiterate verbally. So Mr. Close comments that the statute intends that local governments will make it easier to develop housing on rural residential land, but that the ordinance proposed today is making it more confusing for riparian areas and more difficult for coastal areas. And Kevin touched on this just a little bit momentarily, but a moment ago, but I'll go more into it. So while Senate Bill 1015 and House Bill 3197 aim to make housing development easier, the actual statutory requirement is limited to ensuring that clear and objective standards are available for housing development. And this was emphasized in the case Dreyer versus City of Eugene. Clear and objective standards are inherently more rigid and less flexible than discretionary ones, meaning that not all proposals or properties will be able to qualify for the clear and objective pathway. In those instances, the discretionary pathway is still available. In addition to satisfying Senate Bill 1051 and House Bill 3197, the ordinance must also comply with the statewide planning goals, including protections for sensitive natural resources. In some situations, this results in more onerous, clear and objective standards to ensure that the resource is being protected in compliance with the statewide planning goals and with the Lane County Rural Comprehensive Plan. The ordinance preserves existing discretionary pathway while adding a clear and objective option, which may make development easier for some qualifying properties, but not all of those properties. The ordinance does not make it harder to develop housing. In some cases, it may simplify the process. However, due to site-specific constraints or development preferences, not all properties will benefit from the clear and objective pathway. Mr. Close also argues that the riparian standards are already clear and objective, and staff agrees that some aspects of the riparian standards are clear and objective, specifically the riparian setback area, which is a measurement from the ordinary high water onto a subject property, and the vegetation removal standards, which identify a total area where vegetation is allowed to be removed. However, there are aspects of this program that are not clear and objective and necessitate creation of clear and objective permitting path for housing impacts in the riparian area in order to comply with statute. The term vegetation removal is undefined by the current code, leading to ambiguity about what actions are allowed within the riparian setback area that constitute vegetation removal. The current code, while it specifies a total area of vegetation removal allowed, does not specify where within the riparian setback vegetation can be removed, creating confusion about whether removal must occur in a single area or can be spread out across multiple areas. Therefore, staff determined that the current standards are not fully clear and objective, which justifies the need for the proposed changes. Specifically, those changes were to define the term vegetation removal and identify a clear and objective method for vegetation removal related to the establishment of a dwelling near the riparian area. Lastly, Mr. Close had questions regarding the amount of vegetation allowed to be removed from the riparian area. As described in the staff memo, the amount of vegetation able to be removed under the clear and objective pathway will be less than what was permitted under the current discretionary pathway. Staff aim to make the vegetation removal standards for the clear and objective pathway as similar as possible to the existing discretionary pathway. However, since the dwelling permitted under the clear and objective standard pathway cannot be located within the riparian setback area, the maximum extent of the vegetation removal in the setback from the house will be less than what's currently allowed. Furthermore, since the clear and objective permitting pathway is more restrictive than the discretionary option, We concluded that an EC, or economic, social, environmental, and energy analysis, is not necessary for the proposed amendments. The proposed amendments are not substantially changing the program to protect the riparian resources. The riparian setback area is not being changed, nor is any existing standard being amended. The ordinance is simply adding a second pathway for implementation of current standards that are clear and objective. Furthermore, our review of case law on this matter supported not doing an EC analysis for the amendments for those reasons. Do you have something to say about this?
Yeah, I do. In Mr. Reeder's oral testimony, he provided primarily an argument that the Lane Code 16253 is changing substantially to increase the protected areas of Class 1 streams in Lane County, which would be a major change to the Goal 5 inventory. And he states that the specific provision that is removed is the, I'm going to read it. The old subsection 2 reads, the following standards shall apply to the maintenance, removal, destruction, and replacement of indigenous vegetation within the riparian setback area along Class 1 streams designated for riparian vegetation protection by the Rural Comprehensive Plan. Mr. Reeder argues that we are removing the reference to the Rural Comprehensive Plan and therefore expanding the inventory beyond what is already adopted. The new code includes the same provision. The new code reads, the riparian setback is the horizontal distance, this is subsection 2 as well. The riparian setback is the horizontal distance upland of the ordinary high water line of a Class 1 stream designated for riparian vegetation protection by the Rural Comprehensive Plan. There is no change. That's all I've got to say.
Thanks, Kevin. So that concludes our response to public testimony at this time. Thank you.
Well done. Well done. Does any commissioners have questions for staff or need additional information before considering closing the public hearing and moving to deliberations? I'll let you digest that for a minute. Yes, Commissioner Farr.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. You referred to a letter you sent to us last night.
It should have been, yeah.
I don't see it.
Okay.
I'm scouting and looking for it, and I've looked
It
at,
should have
I've
come
received
from
one from
Jessica.
Mr. Reeder at 8:20 last night, but
The letter was in response to Mr. Close's submittal, and it should have come from Jessica Gebb.
from Geb, there it is. Okay, I see right there, thank you. I was looking for your name. Thank you.
Oh, Commissioner Buck, please.
I don't necessarily have any particular questions for staff. I am just still digesting all the material and want to be able to take the time to look at the letters, and you referenced one from ODF too, which I haven't had a chance to look at. So I'm just suggesting to the board, if we want to take some more time to review the material, I would really appreciate that. I know that there's some suggestions for future dates, for future either testimony or just deliberations, but I would appreciate that personally, because there's just a lot here.
Yeah, Commissioner Trieger, then we'll go to Commissioner Farr.
Thank you. I did see the response to Mr. Close's letter. I've not seen Mr. Reeder's letter. If it came at 8:20 last night, that's why. And I see we have a hard copy of a letter here, which I also haven't read because it was just sitting here when we showed up for business, and I skimmed it, but I can't. So I agree, a little more time, and the ODFW letter would be great to have that forwarded. I don't want us to delay too long because I understand this is a legislative item that has a time sensitivity to it that we're already beyond. And so procedurally, my question is, do we still have the opportunity to close the public hearing, but then delay the deliberations until commissioners have had time to review the materials? Is that right?
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
correct.
so I'd be supportive of that. Thank you.
Commissioner Farr.
Well, I don't need to say anything other than we got your letter at 4:27, which I just opened, and got Mr. Reeder's at 8:20, and Mr. Malone's when I sat down this afternoon, so I concur with the other commissioners.
Vice Chair.
Yeah, there's a lot here, so I appreciate everybody wanting to take a break on it. What is the legislative consequences if we do delay it a little bit further? Because I would like to keep the public hearing open myself, which I know is push us back a couple weeks.
The House bill doesn't include specific punishment or anything like that. The context is that in other counties in the state, DLCD and the Land Conservation Development Commission, LCDC, have shown their willingness to issue a stay on development in counties where clear and objective standards have been brought into question. And that's the fear, is that if we are challenged on our existing standards and they're deemed not clear and objective, that LCDC could issue a stay on development in Lane County, which is would be a greater impact on the development of housing for all of us.
Right, got it. My thought is I would like to keep the public hearing open a couple weeks to make sure we get this right and make sure we hear from everybody, especially after today's testimony, I think would be excellent. That's my vote.
Yes, Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you. I just want to be clear. So we can close the public hearing, but wait to do deliberations till we've had a chance to review, because this has been to Planning Commission twice, and we do have a lot of material already. My concern is if we keep the public hearing open, we could be right back where we are today on another public hearing date, because more testimony could come in at 8:20 the night before or appear at our desk the moment we gavel in. So I'm trying to forestall that and take the information that we've got to date, but wait to deliberate and make a decision on it. So that's my concern about keeping the public hearing open.
Commissioner Farr.
I would concur with that analysis, but that being said, if substantive information is on the horizon, I'd prefer to wait for it. For instance, your letter came, in response to Mr. Close, came out at 4:27 yesterday. You know, we could go back and forth forever and ever and ever. However, you make some pretty substantial disclaimers regarding his letter that I think he's just had an opportunity to seek for the first time. So I'm in favor of delaying keeping the public hearing open for however long it takes. 24 more hours if that's all it takes.
Yes, Commissioner Buck.
I think there might be a balance that could be made. We could say we'll keep the public hearing open until October 31st, let's say, or so that we're not hit with something like the day of our meeting.
What are the proposed dates for?
It shows November 4th.
Yeah.
As a proposed date. It's just a suggestion.
I think it's great.
Yeah, I like it.
I'm just curious. I'm in concurrence with not closing the public hearing and setting a third reading and a hearing for November 4th. That's option 3. But I'm just curious, when we're talking about potentiality and fear and litigation and all that, really the only pending case we have before us that's, as you said, Kevin's not really related, is the Jones-McCann case, right? There is no other situation or permit that is circling around this wagon? Or am I misinformed?
Not currently, but we have been challenged twice in the past, I believe, on our standards not being clear and objective, specifically in the coastal zones. So in those cases, we changed our approach and how we were doing the application at the time. But if we were challenged and then changed our approach and then it was appealed to LUBA and LUBA determined it to not be clear and objective, then we faced that same situation I was outlining, where DLCD or LCDC could put a stay on development.
And a stay on development is for those two constituents? Or a stay on development
No.
countywide? What are we talking when we say, oh, council, please join us?
No, we love it.
Is this on? It's on, yeah. Okay. So I just
Go ahead and
wanted,
state your name too, please, for the record.
sorry, Ann Davies, Assistant County Counsel. I've been helping staff with drafting this code provision. You know, beyond the issue that Kevin's been bringing up as far as the stay, which is also an issue, the longer we wait, the longer we're likely to be in a situation where someone submits an application under the old code, because we don't have a new code yet, even though the legislative mandate was you must be clear and objective. And so then we're in this situation of having code that we know is not clear and objective, but we can't apply the protective measures that are not clear and objective. This is a situation that happened in Washington County where you're kind of stuck between the dictates of the goal that is to preserve the resource and these code provisions that are maybe clear and objective, maybe not. So there is urgency to get something adopted. I mean, I think it's fine to, continue the hearing or not continue the hearing and move forward, make sure we're moving forward progress. But between now and when we get it adopted, there is a risk that someone will come in and they will be looking to apply the current code, which is not clear and objective in some respects, or at least arguably. And their argument is, those things are not clear and objective. You can't apply them to me. So the county's in this weird place of saying, okay, we have these code provisions that are not clear and objective. We can't apply them. There's no protection for that resource. So that's the risk also. It's not just the DLCD coming down and saying you can't build anything. So it's a risky place to be.
Thank you. Commissioner Farr.
Thanks. And while the risk is high, the probability is low, in my estimation, and you kind of balance those things. So I think Commissioner Buck's recommendation is one that I prefer to go with. That being said, there are a couple of things that you said that we have to live with, right? That you said the testifiers express confusion, and you said that's natural because it's hard to convey what we're doing in easy to understand language. I paraphrase that a little bit. We're never going to get past that. There's nothing we're going to do.
Trying.
And also you said new standards may not be accessible to some landowners. That's always going to be the case, I think. And also clear and objective standards tend to be more rigid than discretionary standards. That's always going to be the case. So you're stating facts there that we have to live with. Other things we can try to mitigate in the meantime, and if a 2-week delay is going to help us do that, I'm cool with that.
All right, I'm seeing some head nods on circling the wagons around November 4th. Is there a motion that we can be putting out there, Vice Chair?
Yes, I'll steal Commissioner Buck's motion. I move to approve a second reading instead of third reading and continued hearing. The public hearing will close on October 31st, and the public hearing will be November 4th, 2025 at 1:30 p.m. time certain.
Public testimony will close.
Public testimony, excuse me, yes.
Does that make sense?
Can I get some clarification on what that motion was about October 31st?
Close the public testimony at,
Close the
for
record.
October,
Yeah.
close the record.
So I think our preference would be that we're continuing the hearing. So on that date, people can come up and say what they want to say. So we're not going to close the record on October 31st. We're just going to continue the hearing to November 4th. Is that kind of what you're thinking?
Well, I just want to clarify the options. I'm not understanding fully if the board would like the hearing to be continued to November 4th, at which time the record would be fully open and people would come to November 4th and be able to give public testimony. I don't think that was the intent. An option that isn't outlined in the script or the memo is that we could come back on November 4th for deliberations, and sometime between now and then we could have a record periods and leave the record open if there's some desire from the board to give the public opportunity to respond to these letters that have been submitted in the last few hours.
Which would include no testimony, public testimony on November 4th, but any discussion that we may have regarding additional material that came in while the public hearing was open, we could have that discussion.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, so with that in mind, Vice Chair, would you mind restating the motion, please?
So on October 4th, you would like to have, or November 4th, yeah, okay, so, yeah, that makes more sense. Okay, so I move to approve the second reading and set a third reading and continued hearing for November 4th, 2025, with the record to close on October 31st.
So maybe Mr. Bavette can help us out here, but I think that if we're going to have a continued hearing to a date certain would mean that we're continuing the hearing to November 4th and then we're going to allow people to testify. And if that's not what you're hoping to do, then I think what we want to do is we need to leave the record open for all and everyone to submit anything they want to related to the ordinance by October 31st, and then deliberations will occur on November 4th.
Well, we tried. We were just trying to keep emails from,
She said it, though.
Yeah, that, yeah.
She just mentioned it.
Say that one more time, Ms. Davies,
That's
please.
what I was
Do you
nodding
want
to.
to, do we need to pause so she could write out a motion?
Do you want me to
We've
just,
done that before.
Yeah,
you get that,
suggest
Rob?
Suggest a motion.
Suggest a motion.
All right, we'll pause just for a minute until we get a written motion from the
Yeah.
experts at our legal table. In the interim, we will assign a commissioner to sing a favorite song. Who's first? Yeah.
So use language at line.
so just to be clear,
Clear and
Right.
objective, please, yes.
clear and objective, yes, this causes me PTSD, but aside from that, Mr. Chair, I think the motion needs to close the hearing, keeping the record open until October 31st, and continuing the matter for deliberations to November, what did you say it was? November 4th, time certain, whatever the rest of your language is.
So moved.
Close the public hearing, keep the record open.
Until October 31st for written submissions, and continue the matter for deliberations and possible action on November 4th at, is there a time certain?
It's usually
Yeah,
1:30.
1:30.
At 1:30?
Right after lunch.
There you go.
so can we,
Yep.
as stated?
I'm going to throw in one more curveball, I'm sorry. Staff would request that we have a response period. So if the board is choosing to have an open record period to October 31st, we would request that we have another week to respond to anything that's put into the record during that open record period.
So then we want to adjust the open record period unless you want to move the hearing.
Oh, I could suggest it as the record stays open till the 28th, and then we have a 1-week response period until the 4th.
Now you've got it charted out. So the motion would be to close the public hearing, keep the record open until October 28th, with staff permitted to submit written response to the record for 7 days after October 28th, and continue this matter to November 4th at 1:30 PM time certain here in Harris Hall.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Okay. Chair, I have a motion. I'm going to close the hearing, make a motion to close the hearing, keep the record open until October 28th with staff response open, with the week of staff response, and continue this matter until November 4th. 1:30 time certain.
Perfect. I have a second.
Second.
Second. Thank you, Vice Chair. Vice Chair has moved to keep, to close the hearing, keep the record open until October 28th, allowing staff permitted for 1 week to submit responses, and us come back for deliberations on November 4th, 1:30 time certain, and it's been seconded by Commissioner Buck. Is there any discussion to the motion? Yes, Commissioner Farr.
That motion is the clearest thing I've heard all day.
Hallelujah.
Thanks, Kevin.
And objective.
I object.
So now we'll call for the vote. All those in favor of the motion proposed, say aye. Aye. Motion passes 5-0. Well done, team. Good job. We'll see you in the future, as they say.
It's not ready for this.
Yeah, November 4th. Yeah, that's when we'll see him. All right, sounds good. Well, we did have to bump an item this morning. It was our item 60, the county administration announcements. Mr. Mokryski, you've been patiently waiting, sir. Thank you very much. It's all on you now.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I just had I wanted to offer a number of thanks. Commissioners, last week, you had a board meeting in Blue River at the Mackenzie School. You toured a number of facilities and engaged with people. I unfortunately was not able to be there. I was out of town celebrating my mother's 80th birthday, but I got a lot of feedback from folks about how wonderful that the tours and the board meeting were. And so I just wanted to offer a few thanks to folks that worked really hard behind the scenes to set that up. In particular, as you all know, Jessica Gebb and Judy Williams led the logistical efforts to pull together that meeting. There's a lot of work to do a board meeting outside of this room where everything is set up. So Jessica and Judy, thank you. To Neil Moyer and Tim Gardner of Metro TV, who did great work in making sure that we had video and audio. And then Brian Manili of Pro Sound and Music made sure that we were able to host a hybrid meeting. That's the other new thing we have to do since COVID is we're required to have all the board meetings as hybrid options. Our wildfire recovery team, Matt McRae and Megan Hurian, joined in the logistics effort and organized the agenda. Then, of course, so many of our community partners. You all saw Chief Darren Busich, the Mackenzie Fire and Rescue Chief, Bjorn Carlson from Lane County Parks, Jacob Fox from Homes for Good, the team at Mackenzie Community Land Trust, Brandy Ferguson, Lane Tompkins, Tabitha Eck, and Braden Ravenscraft, Devin Thompson and Mary Ellen Wheeler at the Mackenzie Valley Long-Term Recovery Group, and then Melanie Stanley, the owner of the Meyer General Store. And then, of course, at the board meeting, you heard from Susan Frick of eWeb, Ron Woodard from Lane County Public Works, Neil Barrett with Oregon Housing and Community Services, and Betsy Hunter with the Long-Term Recovery Group. And also a thanks to Greg Rickoff, who filled in for me because I was out of town. So I just wanted to thank commissioners for your time and effort in doing the tours and the meeting. I know that that's a lot to take on, and really thank all the people that work behind the scenes to plan and make that a success, as well as members of the Mackenzie Valley that participated in that. And I know there's an interest in pursuing other, let's call them in the field board meetings. And so we look for opportunities to do that in other parts of the county. And just thanks again to everyone for the great work. I think it was very well received and very much appreciated. That's all I have, Chair.
Awesome. Well, big hands off and hand clap for those folks that you mentioned. Mr. Mokrowski, thank you very much. Our commissioners' business items are our last one for the afternoon before we move to executive session. Is there any announcements by the commissioners? Or any comments or remonstrance from this morning?
Include committee report?
And it's now concluding committee reports. Yes, sir. Go ahead, Commissioner Farr.
Well, I won't go into all of them, but one meeting that I attended last week that I attend on a regular basis is the 15th Night Network Partner Meeting. We had a panel that consisted of me and Representative Fragala and City Councilor Randy Groves and City Councilor Corey Rodley from Springfield. And we had a lengthy discussion with the large group of partners in the 15th Night / Looking Glass Youth Services. Lane County had a good presence there. And what really stood out to me is how many of the youth services that take place are funneled through Lane County and Lane County staff. We had no less than 7 staff members there who were there just reporting on their work to this pretty large group of youth network providers. And when I say large, there were probably 45 people in the room, 45 different agencies and people in the room. So it just really is indicative of how much work Lane County staff puts in on youth services. That's the only thing I'm talking about right now is youth services. So, Ms. Margaret, I'll pass that along. Kirsten London was there. The list is lengthy of who were there, but it made me understand the depth of work that is happening at Lane County to support the nonprofits and the municipal agencies that we work with.
Great, awesome. Commissioner Trigger.
Sure. Thank you. I'll give 2 updates. One is the Public Health Advisory Committee met yesterday. Yes, yesterday. Talked about a lot of things, but in particular, there was a lot of discussion about COVID vaccine access this season and all the confusion with changes in recommendations out of federal agencies and then the formation of the Western States Health Alliance, and just conversation about how best that committee can members can be used as ambassadors out to the community about the safety and efficacy of vaccines in general and the COVID vaccine in particular, and how and where people can safely receive those. A lot of really great ideas and discussion. And then I wanted to give a little report out on the statewide opioid settlement board that I serve on. We have now executed 82 of our 91 agreements with direct grantees receiving those funds. We have allocated a little over $101 million to specific projects across the state. About 31 million, so about a third of that has actually been expended so far. One of the reasons there's a gap between the allocations and the expenses is some grantees have indicated they're prioritizing spending down some of their other less reliable or less stable funding sources first, given the current resource climate and the challenges to funding. And then after our $40 million set aside for our tribal governments, we have different buckets or categories that we fund. And prevention is the category with the highest number of grantees or projects, but not the highest dollar allocation. And the other funding categories are harm reduction, recovery, and treatment, and then some smaller amounts that go to research and evaluation and some data systems work. And there's lots more about that board and our work on the OHA website about the settlement board if people want to see the details. But there are some of those funds from the settlement that go to the statewide board that are coming back here to Lane County specifically for a couple of important initiatives in underserved rural communities here. So just wanted to share that.
Great, thank you for that report, and thank you for your involvement and commitment to that cause and funneling the money where it's appropriate. You do good work there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any other committee reports, or if not, we'll move on to some future board assignments. Anybody have any future board assignments for Mr. McCrysky? Yes, Commissioner Buck.
I have one for the board. We all received a letter from the Row River Fire Protection folks, just trying to give an update. They're still desperately trying to find a way in which to build a facility to house all their equipment. They just got donated land. That was very generous size. But they requested a time maybe to come and give us an update on where they're at. I did chat with them yesterday, and they're looking for 30 to 45 minutes max. So I'm hoping to get head nods to be able to add them to the agenda to give us an update.
Yeah, looks like you got 5, 4, and you. All right, anyone else? If not, Mr. McCrysky, could you repeat that board order, please?
I just have the assignment that Mr. Buck just asked for. So Jessica should be able to find that real easy.
Real easy. All right, sounds good. Is there any other business for the good of the order before we recess for our afternoon exec session? If not, let me read us in. The Board of County Commissioners will now meet in one executive session. This session is to consider information or records that are exempt by law from public inspection and is held to pursuant to ORS 192.6602F, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive session for the purposes listed. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are precluded from attending. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. Members of the news media are not allowed to tape, video, record, or otherwise record an executive session, and verbatim notes are prohibited. No decision may be made in executive session. We will return to public session tomorrow, October 15th at 9 a.m. in the Board of County Commissioners Conference Room. We are recessed for executive session.
Directly in, or we